Hello and welcome back to the lore series. So today we're going to be covering the Furbolgs, which are lovely, fun and kind of strange bear people. Now I'll just get right into it. These guys have spent most of their time basically just being decently friendly and peaceful beings, with a few of their tribes having pretty decent relations with the Night Elves actually. And while we first do encounter them on Kalimdor, mainly during questing as a Lobi Night Elf or Worgen, they actually originate from Northrend, interestingly enough. Now, when we talk about their origins, it's kind of tricky because there's not a lot in-game or in the modern lore, so the best thing we can do is look back to the old source books from the WoW RPG. Technically, this stuff isn't canon, but as far as I'm concerned, if it fits the current story of the world, and it hasn't been contradicted or written over, then it's probably worth just sort of accepting for now. It's the best we can do. So, according to these source books, they were actually around before the time that the Titans arrived on Azeroth, and while they don't keep a recorded history, there are apparently stories within their sort of oral histories about the Titans' arrival. And then finally, in the Lands of Magic source book, it actually says that they may be descended from early Pandaren that arrived in Northrend and then went feral, or that conversely the Pandaren might be descended from Furbolgs that managed to get their way to the south. Though this does conflict with the theory that the Pandaren are vaguely, distantly related to raccoons. Though I suppose the raccoons could actually be a shared relative between the two. Hard to know, and one thing I will say though is that does sound a lot more sensible than the theory that the Pandaren and Tuskar are slightly related. Anyway, let's get back on topic. So the good news is that we do know a decent amount of their history since the War of the Ancients, though stuff here does get a little bit messy because of time-traveling tomfoolery. So in the original actual kind of War of the Ancients, they just weren't involved at all. However, it is reasonable to assume that they did suffer quite, to quite a large extent from the Legion's presence in their forest homes, because the Legion, of course, brings with it lots of corruption and various nasties. However, they did play a role in the version of the War of the Ancients as told in the trilogy of books by Richard Knack. In these books, Ronan, Krasus, and Broxgar are all shot back in time, which leads to an altered version of events. In this version, the Furbolgs were actually a part of an alliance that was formed to fight off the Legion forces. We don't know exactly how many Furbolgs were involved in the war, and since the war actually took place before the Shattering, I think we can assume that what we now know as the Northrend Furbolgs could actually have been involved, because of course the world was just all one continent back then. After the war though, stuff did settle down quite a bit, and over time, the Night Elves actually started to get a little bit more accepting of the Furbolgs. I'm going to assume that the mixture of them being friendly in the War of the Ancients, and then also the sort of shift in attitudes with the Night Elves towards druidism and nature-related things, maybe made them a little bit more friendly. Meanwhile though, in Northrend, some interesting stuff happens. So first of all, some of the Furbolgs over there basically just adapted to their more harsh climate and turned into what we now know as the Polar Furbolgs. Basically just the ones with the white fur. Now where it gets interesting is a few thousand years before the events of Warcraft 3. Basically, a bunch of Night Elves attempted to grow a new world tree called Vordrasil in the Grizzly Hills of Northrend. Unfortunately though, the project failed because of our good old friends the Old Gods, and that corruption kind of sucked, but all was not bad, and the Furbolgs essentially ended up with a nice new city. They founded the city of Grizzlemaw in the stump of the failed world tree, and for a few thousand years this city would essentially be the home to Furbolgs of many different tribes. More on this later though, I will cover the specific story in a bit. Now, the Northrend Furbolgs actually got kind of lucky in that they managed to skip out on the fallout of Warcraft 3. During the war, the Burning Legion corrupted much of the forests, and then we've got also things like, say, Illidan and the Skull of Gul'dan. Basically, this just led to a bunch of corruption, which ended up driving many of the Furbolg tribes mad. In addition to this, a whole bunch of satyrs successfully corrupted tribes as well, and you can see the effects of this mostly in Felwood. Nearly all of the tribes in existence were affected, and they now just spend most of their time warring and pretty much trying to attack everything that moves. A few tribes did manage to escape this fate, though they mainly just keep themselves to themselves, which is probably a good bet for them because the world is kind of mean at the minute. The Night Elves though were quite concerned by all of this, and many of the quests in some of their zones do involve dealing with the Furbolg's corruption and trying to investigate its root cause and various things like that. Now that's the main sort of history of them as a species or animal, whatever, covered. Next I'll talk about the culture and religion, and then I'll just quickly touch on the more interesting tribes of Furbolgs. So as far as the culture and religion go, we do know some things. As far as the practicalities go, their religion appears to be a mixture of shamanism and druidism, basically anything that's nature related. We can see this quite clearly from their in-game representation. In addition to this, they do seem to worship ancients. We know specifically about Ursok and Ursol, who we deal with in Northrend. So that's mainly their religion. It's just kind of your typical forest people one that's got a few ancient spirits and just loves nature. Now their native language is called Ursine, but some of the Furbolgs in Teldrassil and Ashenvale actually ended up speaking a little bit of Darnassian, and basically, like most intelligent races, they are capable of learning languages, especially if they need to trade or do anything like that. Though, of course, do bear in mind, these guys were living in a small little tribe, whereas the Night Elves were in proper cities, so they're definitely very low-tech in comparison. But still, a few of them did manage to learn Darnassian during the few thousand years of peace between the War of the Ancients and then, of course, Warcraft 3. As far as their various structures and things like that go, socially, well, they've got the chieftain of whatever clan who usually seems to have some sort of just either extreme power or a sort of more shamanistic or druidistic sort of leaning, and then other than that, most of them just seem to ramble around within the tribe and do their own thing. It's hard to know that much because, well, as I said, most of them have been trying to kill us every time we've seen them. Physically, they are, as we know, just sort of large bear people, and though they are very tall and powerful, I think the Warcraft RPG says they're about 500 pounds in weight and can be up to 10 feet tall, which is definitely very tall. Apparently, the grey-furred ones are mainly the shaman ones, and ones with black fur are, you know, of course, like the big fighter people, because, hey, big black fur things are menacing, I suppose. Kind of interesting. Essentially, they just don't look like something you want to get up and close with. Now that the Furbolgs, in terms of their just, you know, culture and all that stuff are covered with, let's talk about the various tribes, and I'm just going to cover the interesting ones here. So first of all, let's just start off with one that you probably know, and that's the Timbermaw tribe. The Timbermaws are one of the few remaining uncorrupted ones, and unlike most modern tribes, they are actually willing to befriend other races, which is pretty cool. Now, while the Third War raged on in the forests, they basically just retreated to their decently large sort of holdfast of Timbermaw Hold, and they played it safe until the end of the war. Since the war, they've been sort of slowly venturing out, and they've been trying to stop the corruption of the other Furbolgs. That's mainly done by killing them though, and in-game we do see them kill the Winterfall and Deadwood tribes, which have both been corrupted. And of course, one of the reasons why they end up befriending the players is because we are willing to go out there and kill those tribes. It genuinely, though, does seem like they want to end the suffering of the other Furbolgs, because it's not like they've turned evil, they've just been driven mad, which I'm guessing is not that good a thing. Next, we've got the Stillpine Furbolgs. These might not be known to most players because they are found on Azure Mist Isle. Basically what happens is the Draenei meet them, work out how to communicate with them, and then they end up helping them fight off the corrupted Bristleim tribe. After that, they're all friends, so I suppose there's just a decently amicable relationship going on there outside the Exodar. And now, there are loads of other tribes around the Night Elf lands, but most of them are just corrupted cannon fodder for the sake of quests. The more lore-worthy tribes, though, are those of Grizzlemaw. So when we left off, the city of Grizzlemaw had just been founded in the failed world tree of Vordrassil. One winter, the Frostpaws, who were the tribe who mainly lived in the city, actually invited the other tribes in for shelter, and this started a thousands of year-long tradition of the city just being peacefully shared between everyone. But alas, this was not to last. By the time we arrive in Northrend, the old god corruption that killed the World Tree originally has actually driven them mad. The Frostpaws and Redfangs are now just locked in a constant battle for control of the city. Through quests, we find that the Furbolgs have actually resurrected Ursok. Now, Ursok is one of the ancients that I mentioned earlier, and I might do a video just on the ancients in general at some point, but all you need to know now is that he is basically a demigod, sort of up there with Cenarius and friends, but he actually died during the War of the Ancients. His children, though, realize when we speak to them that he was resurrected with the same corruption that took over the Furbolgs in the area, and we later find that the Furbolgs have been trying to plant a sapling from one of the Vordrassil seeds that was left over. And what we do is we burn the sapling, we steal the remaining seeds so they don't try to do it again, we then purify the ashes of the burnt sapling, we kill Ursoc, and then we spread the purified ashes on his body, which removes the corruption. His spirit then pops up and lets us know the full extent of Yogg-Saron's influence in the area, though we don't actually get around to helping out the Furbolgs. We just kind of say, oh great, we got our info, and then we skip off to another zone, and of course eventually kill, air quotes, kill Yogg-Saron in Ulduar. And that's really pretty much as far as it goes in terms of the lore. Other than the Timbermaws and the Stillpines, most of them are either dead or hard at work getting themselves killed by enterprising low-level players. Overall, I think the lore is pretty cool, and it just looks like the worst of the times are over for them. I'd say the tribes that aren't mad will probably get better, and that's about as much as we'll really see of them. Anyway, that's been it for this lore video. Be sure to let me know if you've got any topics that you'd like to see covered in future episodes. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.